It was a bright Monday morning, and the headquarters of Callaway Enterprises was already buzzing with activity. Employees hurried in and out of the building, carrying files, sipping coffee, and preparing for another busy day. In the middle of the grand lobby, Maria, a janitor in her late 50s, was carefully mopping the marble floor. She had worked in this company for years, quietly doing her job, always making sure everything was clean and in place. Maria wasn't just another worker. She was kind, hardworking, and respected by many employees who saw her every day. She greeted people with a warm smile, even when they were too busy to notice. Though her work was often overlooked, she took pride in it, knowing she was contributing to keeping the company running smoothly. Just as she was about to finish cleaning near the main entrance, the heavy glass doors swung open, and in walked Richard Callaway, the company's CEO. He was a tall man in his late 40s, always dressed in expensive suits, carrying an air of authority wherever he went. He had built a reputation for being strict and demanding, and many employees were afraid of him. He never had time for small talk, and he certainly never paid attention to people like Maria. That morning, Richard was already in a bad mood. He had just come from a frustrating meeting, and his patience was running thin. As he walked across the lobby, he suddenly stopped and looked down at his expensive Italian shoes. There was a small water spot on them, most likely from the floor Maria had just mopped. His face twisted in irritation. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head. Maria, who was about to put her mop away, turned around when she heard his voice. She saw him staring at his shoes, clearly upset. Richard pointed at them. "Look at this. Do you even know how much these cost?" he said, his voice sharp. Maria looked at the shoes and then at Richard. She immediately felt uncomfortable. She had seen many frustrated people in her years of working, but she had never been spoken to like this before. "I'm sorry, sir," she said politely. "The floor was just cleaned. I must have missed a spot." But Richard wasn't interested in explanations. He sighed loudly and then, to everyone's shock, stepped forward and pointed at his shoes again. "Then fix it," he said. "Clean them." A heavy silence fell over the lobby. Employees nearby stopped what they were doing and looked on in disbelief. Some exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. Was he serious? Was he really asking Maria, a hard-working janitor, to wipe his shoes? Maria hesitated. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. But the stern look on his face told her otherwise. Slowly, with her hands slightly shaking, she bent down, took out a cloth from her cleaning cart, and began wiping the spot off his shoes. The air in the lobby felt heavy, and no one dared to say a word. As Maria knelt down to wipe the CEO's shoes, the entire lobby remained silent. No one had expected this to happen. People had seen Richard Callaway be strict before, but this was something different. It was not just about rules or discipline. It was about how he treated people. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she gently wiped the small water spot from Richard's expensive shoes. She had been working in this company for years, and never had she felt so small. She wasn't ashamed of her job. She worked hard every day, keeping the office clean, making sure everything looked perfect for the employees and visitors. But today, it felt different. It felt wrong. Richard stood tall, arms crossed, watching her work as if it were the most normal thing in the world. His expression remained cold, showing no hint of regret. To him, this was just another task being done by an employee. He didn't care that Maria was older, that she had spent years taking care of the very floors he walked on every day. To him, she was just a worker doing what he asked. But there was someone in the lobby who didn't look away. Daniel Harper, a man in his early 50s, was standing near the reception desk, watching everything unfold. He was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, but unlike Richard, there was kindness in his eyes. Daniel wasn't just another businessman. He was one of the company's biggest investors. He had put millions into Callaway Enterprises, trusting that it was a company built on strong values and good leadership. But now, as he watched the CEO humiliate an innocent worker. He felt something shift inside him. Daniel had always believed that a company's true strength came from its people, from the hardworking employees who kept everything running smoothly, from the janitors to the executives. And yet, here was the company's top leader, treating one of his workers as if she were nothing. The sight of Maria kneeling on the floor, her hands wiping away something so insignificant, made Daniel's heart ache. He could see the pain in her eyes, the quiet dignity in the way she did her work without protest. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shouting. She was simply doing what she had been told, because she knew fighting back wouldn't change anything. But Daniel knew something that Richard didn't. Respect wasn't demanded, it was earned. And right now, Richard was losing the respect of everyone in that room. Employees who once feared him were now looking at him in disgust. Some of them had their phones out, recording the moment. Others exchanged whispers, shaking their heads in disbelief. Daniel knew that this wasn't just a small incident. This moment would change everything. He took a deep breath and decided that he wouldn't just stand there. Something had to be done. And soon, Richard Calloway would realize that his actions had consequences. The moment Maria finished wiping Richard's shoes, she slowly stood up, her face calm, but her heart heavy. She placed the cloth back into her cleaning cart, nodding slightly as if to say she had done her part. Richard didn't even bother to thank her. He simply glanced at his shoes, gave a small nod of approval, and walked away toward the elevators as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and the people in the lobby knew it. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence felt heavier than before. The employees who had witnessed the scene looked at each other, their faces filled with shock, disappointment, and even anger. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. Then a murmur spread through the crowd. "Did you see that?" whispered one employee. "He made her clean his shoes," another said in disbelief. "This isn't right," a young intern muttered under his breath, shaking his head. People weren't just shocked. They were upset. Richard Calloway was their boss, the head of the company, the man who was supposed to lead with dignity. But today, he had shown a different side of himself, a side that people would not forget so easily. What Richard didn't realize was that someone had captured the entire incident on video. A few employees had taken out their phones, recording everything from the moment he pointed at his shoes to the moment Maria bent down to clean them. They didn't plan to share it at first, but as the minutes passed and the anger in the room grew, someone decided to post it online. Within an hour, the video began spreading. At first, it was shared among employees inside the company. People forwarded it to their coworkers, whispering about how unfairly Maria had been treated. Some sent it to friends outside the company, and soon, it reached people who didn't even work at Calloway Enterprises. Then, something unexpected happened. The video went viral. By the afternoon, thousands of people had seen it. People on social media began talking about the incident, sharing their thoughts and frustrations. Many were furious at how Richard had treated Maria. They couldn't understand how a powerful CEO could behave that way toward an elderly janitor who was simply doing her job. Comments flooded in. "This is absolutely disgusting. How can someone be this heartless? Maria deserves respect, not humiliation. If this is how this company treats its workers, I'm never buying anything from them again." People started tagging news channels, reporters, and even famous personalities, asking them to speak up about what had happened. The pressure was building, and soon, the company would no longer be able to ignore it. Inside Calloway Enterprises, the atmosphere was tense. Employees were checking their phones, whispering about the situation. Maria, unaware of the video, continued her work like always, her face showing no anger, only quiet strength. But outside, the world was watching. And soon, Richard Calloway would face a storm he never saw coming. By the next morning, the video of Richard Calloway humiliating Maria had spread everywhere. News outlets picked up the story. Social media was filled with angry comments, and customers of Calloway Enterprises began questioning the company's values. Inside the office, Employees were glued to their phones, reading the latest updates. Some had already received messages from friends and family asking about the situation. The atmosphere in the building was tense, filled with nervous whispers and worried faces. Meanwhile, Richard Calloway sat in his office on the top floor, completely unaware of the storm brewing outside. He had a packed schedule, meetings with board members, discussions about future investments, and other high-level tasks. In his mind, what had happened the previous day was nothing worth thinking about. To him, it was just another ordinary morning. But then his assistant rushed in, looking pale and uneasy. "Sir, we have a problem," she said, holding her tablet with the viral video playing on the screen. Richard frowned and took the tablet from her hands. As he watched the video, his expression darkened. He saw himself pointing at his shoes, ordering Maria to clean them. He saw her bending down, wiping them silently, while his employees stood frozen, too shocked to react. At first, Richard didn't understand why this was such a big deal. But then he noticed the number of views. Millions. The comments were brutal, filled with outrage. Hashtags like #RespectWorkers and #FireCalloway were trending. His phone started buzzing. First, it was calls from journalists asking for a statement. Then, emails from clients demanding answers. But the worst came when his assistant informed him that the company's board members had called for an emergency meeting. Down in the main office, employees watched as Richard hurried past them, looking visibly frustrated. The once powerful CEO now seemed unsettled, his usual confidence shaken. When he entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was serious. The company's top executives, investors, and legal advisors were already seated, waiting for him. Among them was Daniel Harper, the influential investor who had witnessed the entire incident. Daniel was the first to speak. "Richard, do you realize the damage this has done to the company?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Richard scoffed. It was just a small misunderstanding. The internet overreacts all the time. Daniel shook his head. "No, Richard, this is not an overreaction. This is about how you treat people. This is about the company's reputation." Another board member added, "We've already lost major clients overnight. Investors are pulling back. People are talking about boycotting our products. If we don't take action, this company will suffer serious losses." For the first time, Richard felt the weight of the situation. He had always believed he was untouchable, that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. But now he could see the fear in the board members' eyes. They weren't just worried. They were ready to make a decision. And that decision might not be in his favor. Richard Calloway sat in the boardroom, surrounded by the company's top executives and investors. For the first time in years, he felt something he wasn't used to. Pressure. Real pressure. He had always been in control, always the one making decisions. But today, it felt like the power was slipping from his hands. Daniel Harper leaned forward, his sharp eyes locked on Richard. "This is bigger than you think," he said firmly. "People are outraged. Clients are reconsidering their contracts with us. Our stock is already dropping." Richard shifted in his chair. He hated being questioned, especially in front of others. "So what do you want me to do?" he asked, forcing a calm tone. One of the board members, an older woman named Linda, sighed and placed a printed report in front of him. "We conducted a survey overnight," she explained. "More than 70% of our customers said they would stop supporting us if no action is taken. We are already seeing cancellations from major partners. If we don't fix this, it will only get worse." Richard clenched his jaw. It was just a small incident. "I've built this company from the ground up. One mistake doesn't erase everything I've done." Daniel shook his head. "It's not just one mistake, Richard. This was a public display of disrespect. And now the world is watching. We need to act fast." For the first time, Richard felt real fear. He had faced business challenges before, but this was different. He had never been on the receiving end of such strong criticism. In his mind, he was still the powerful CEO, the man in charge. But now, sitting in a room full of disappointed executives, he realized something. He wasn't untouchable. "Here's what we propose," Daniel said, sliding a paper across the table. "A formal apology to Maria, a donation to an organization that supports workers' rights, and a public statement taking full responsibility for your actions." Richard's eyes scanned the paper, his pride burning inside him. He had never apologized for anything before, especially not to a janitor. But before he could refuse, Linda spoke again. "And if you don't agree," she said calmly, "we will be forced to consider another option." Richard's heart pounded. "What option?" Daniel's voice was steady. "We vote on your removal as CEO." The words hit Richard like a punch to the chest. He looked around the room. Some of the board members met his gaze with firm expressions, while others avoided his eyes altogether. He realized then that he was outnumbered. He had spent years building this empire, but in a matter of hours, everything had changed. His arrogance had finally caught up with him. For the first time in his career, Richard Calloway wasn't calling the shots. Someone else was, and he didn't like it one bit. Richard Calloway sat frozen in his chair. The words "removal as CEO" echoed in his mind. He had never imagined this moment, never thought that one incident, one command, could lead to this. His company, his empire. And now he was being given a choice: apologize or lose everything. The room remained silent, all eyes on him. His hands clenched into fists under the table. Apologizing to Maria felt like an attack on his pride, but losing his position, that was even worse. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll do it." Daniel Harper nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. This wasn't about revenge. It was about doing what was right. "We'll arrange a press conference for this afternoon," Linda added. "You'll apologize to Maria personally and issue a public statement." Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He had no choice. Later that afternoon, the press conference was set up in the company's grand hall. Cameras were placed, reporters filled the room, and employees gathered to watch. Maria had been called to attend, but no one told her why. She sat in the front row, confused, wondering why she was suddenly being asked to be there. Then Richard Calloway walked in. For the first time, he looked different, not in his appearance, but in his posture. He wasn't walking with the usual arrogance. Instead, there was hesitation in his steps. He approached the podium, cleared his throat, and faced the cameras. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual confidence. "I want to address a matter that has rightfully gained public attention. Yesterday, I acted in a way that was both inappropriate and disrespectful. I asked an employee, Maria, to clean my shoes. It was wrong. I regret my actions." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. No one had ever heard Richard Calloway apologize before. Richard turned toward Maria, who sat quietly in the front row. Her hands rested on her lap, her face calm but unreadable. "Maria," he said, looking directly at her, "I am truly sorry. You have worked hard for this company, and you deserve respect, not humiliation. I hope you can forgive me." A deep silence followed. Everyone looked at Maria, waiting for her reaction. Maria, the woman who had been humiliated in front of everyone, simply nodded and said, "I accept your apology, Mr. Calloway." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just quiet dignity. The reporters quickly began taking notes. Employees exchanged glances, some surprised, some impressed by Maria's grace. But Richard wasn't done yet. "To show my commitment to making things right, I will be donating to worker support organizations. I will also be reviewing company policies to ensure that every employee at every level is treated with respect." It wasn't just words, it was a step toward change. As Richard stepped back, he realized something. He had built his company on power, but today he had learned the true meaning of leadership. As the press conference ended, the crowd slowly began to disperse. Reporters rushed to publish their stories, employees whispered among themselves, and social media buzzed with reactions. Some people accepted Richard Calloway's apology, while others remained skeptical. Maria, however, remained calm. She had not expected this. An apology from the most powerful man in the company, in front of everyone. It was strange, almost unreal. She had spent years working quietly in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated. But now, the whole world was talking about her. As she stood up to leave, Daniel Harper approached her. He had been watching her throughout the press conference, admiring her quiet strength. "Maria," he said kindly, "I just wanted to say that you handled this with grace. Not everyone could have done that." Maria smiled softly. "I wasn't looking for an apology, sir. I just wanted to do my job with dignity." Daniel nodded. "And you did. More than that, you reminded all of us what real dignity looks like." At that moment, one of the senior executives from the company walked up to Maria. He looked nervous, adjusting his tie before speaking. "Maria, on behalf of Callaway Enterprises, we want to thank you for your years of service," he said. "We realize now that we haven't always shown appreciation for the people who keep this company running." Maria listened quietly. "As part of our efforts to make things right," he continued, "we would like to offer you a promotion. You will be given a new role with better pay and benefits." Maria's eyes widened slightly. A promotion. She had never even dreamed of something like this. "There's more," Daniel added. "Richard has agreed to implement a new policy ensuring fair treatment and recognition for all employees, from janitors to executives. No one should feel invisible." Maria was silent for a moment. She had never asked for special treatment. All she had ever wanted was to be respected for her work. But now, not only was she being offered a better position, but every worker like her would be valued more in the future. She finally spoke, her voice steady. "I don't need a high position or fancy benefits," she said. "But if this means that no one else will go through what I did, then I accept." Daniel smiled. "It does. And you've made a real difference today, Maria." Meanwhile, Richard Calloway watched from a distance. He had spent the last 24 hours feeling like he was losing everything. But now, as he saw Maria being treated with the respect she deserved, he realized something. He had been leading with power, but not with heart. For the first time in years, he felt humbled. And for the first time, he understood that real leadership wasn't about being feared. It was about doing what was right. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him to change. In the days following the press conference, things at Callaway Enterprises slowly began to change. Employees, who once felt powerless under Richard Callaway's leadership, started seeing signs of a new culture, one where respect was not just demanded from top to bottom, but given at every level. Maria continued her work, but this time, something was different. People greeted her with smiles, managers acknowledged her presence, and even executives made the effort to thank the janitorial staff. It felt strange at first, but she appreciated the small gestures. One morning, as she was cleaning the hallway near the executive offices, she heard a voice behind her. "Maria." She turned around and saw Richard Calloway standing there. But he looked different. His usual arrogance was gone. Instead, there was something else in his expression, something almost human. "How are you?" he asked, as if genuinely interested. Maria wiped her hands on her uniform and looked at him calmly. "I'm fine, sir. Just doing my job." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "I just wanted to say, thank you." Maria raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing me something I had forgotten," he admitted. "That power doesn't make a leader. Respect does." Maria didn't say anything right away. She simply studied him, wondering if this change in him was real or temporary. But there was no anger in her heart, no bitterness. She had always believed in kindness, even toward those who had wronged her. She gave him a small smile. "Then I hope you remember that, Mr. Calloway." He nodded, then turned and walked away. It was a simple moment, but it meant more than words could express. Meanwhile, the world outside continued to react to the incident. Some people still criticized Richard, believing his apology was just to save his reputation. Others saw it as a lesson, a reminder that no matter how powerful someone is, respect should always come first. Daniel Harper, who had played a major role in pushing for change, watched as Callaway Enterprises started rebuilding its image. He had no regrets about standing up for what was right. If anything, he felt proud to have helped spark a necessary transformation. As for Maria, she continued working, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She had always taken pride in her job, and now, for the first time, the company she worked for truly appreciated her. Months later, Callaway Enterprises became known not just for its success, but for how it treated its employees. The incident that had once threatened to destroy the company had, in the end, made it stronger. And at the heart of it all was Maria, the quiet, hard-working woman whose simple act of dignity had changed everything. She never sought power or revenge. All she had ever wanted was respect. And in the end, she got it, not just for herself, but for every worker like her.